and welcome back to another episode of Let's Celebrate, a Holiday Origins podcast. I'm your host, Rusty Brown. And for this episode, I'm going to do something a little different. Instead of celebrating a particular holiday, I'm going to do a deeper dive into what is the Celtic Wheel of the Year, which is what I've been discussing over the past couple of months for this second season. So in case you're new here, this is the podcast where each episode I research a specific holiday and discuss the history behind it, how the people before us celebrated it, how it evolved into what we celebrate now. And for this season, since the holidays I will be discussing are older holidays that haven't been popularly celebrated in the recent past, I will be discussing how people have been reconnecting to these holidays and how we can now incorporate these traditions and celebrate these old holidays in a new way. In hopes that everyone can reconnect to these holidays despite their religious or spiritual backgrounds, so that we can reconnect to the earth and its seasons to maybe heal the earth and possibly even find some healing within ourselves. Each episode also includes a CeLibation, that's a themed cocktail with a mocktail option to go along with the holidays that you can make at home to celebrate along with me as you listen. So the CeLibation for this episode is an Irish Wheel of the Year cocktail. Unfortunately, right now I'm in Arkansas and I'm at my mom's house, and she didn't have all the ingredients I need to make this CeLibation that I had prepared for this episode. So I am going to have a local cider as my CeLibation. But since the CeLibation is themed for this episode, I'll go ahead and give you the recipe in case you do want to make it at home to celebrate along with me. So when deciding on this cocktail, I chose the Irish whiskey for the Celtic or Irish component, and the orange because oranges seem to go with every season. For the spring and summer, they are in tropical beverages, and in the fall and winter, they pair perfectly with apples and cinnamon for warm, cozy beverages as well. And then I chose the rosemary since it's an evergreen that lives through all the seasons. And to make this CeLibation, you need 2 ounces of Irish whiskey, juice from 1 orange, a ½ ounce of rosemary infused simple syrup, a ½ ounce of orange liqueur, and you're going to top it with seltzer. You're just going to mix all of those ingredients together, except for the seltzer, shake it, pour over ice, and then top it with seltzer. And then you can garnish it with an orange wheel or a rosemary sprig as you so wish. And for a mocktail, you can mix the orange juice, the rosemary simple syrup with your sparkling water or seltzer. You could also switch that out for a ginger ale to give it a more of a depth of a flavor, and then you got ginger too, which even for the other one, you could top with ginger ale as well, if that's what you're into. So last episode, I celebrated Beltane. And if you celebrated Beltane this year, maybe did you make a bonfire? Did you find a Beltane celebration in your area where they had bonfire or fireworks show or folk songs, or maybe you danced around the maypole? I would love to hear your celebratory stories. You can email me at letscelebratepodcast@gmail.com, and I also have an Instagram page that you can follow, and that is at Let's Celebrate Podcast. And if you prefer to watch the episodes on YouTube, I also have a YouTube channel, and that's youtube.com/@letscelebratepodcast. For me, Beltane this year, since it's my birthday, I had a party the Saturday before, and I kind of incorporated that into my Beltane celebrations. I had hoped to have a bonfire at the end of the night, but it was just too hot, and it actually rained that evening as well. So just nothing was working towards making a fire, and no one was really interested in doing that with me. I did have a pool party, and we ended the night with a dance party, so I feel like that's kind of that's how I celebrated. And then on the 30th, I went to the beach for the day and ended the night by having dinner with family and friends. And since the seasons are different in Guatemala, it doesn't make sense for me to have a fire to ring in these festivals as traditional, but it feels more natural to me to celebrate around water or being in nature. Last season, I discussed the main American holidays, so if you're new here, be sure to go back and listen to those to learn more about the history and the why we celebrate many popular holidays today. And for the second season, I've been celebrating holidays that are conjunctly considered the Celtic Wheel of the Year, or more modernly, just the Wheel of the Year. And these holidays are 8 festivals that are celebrated throughout the cycle of the year. And they correspond with the solstices and the equinoxes. And then there are 4 cross-quarter days that happen in the midpoint between the solstices and equinoxes. And those actually originated with the ancient Celtic people. However, it's now believed that the Celtic people mainly celebrated only those cross-quarter festivals, and that celebrating the solstices and the equinoxes actually originated with the Germanic paganism or Neolithic origins. The 4 main Celtic festivals were Imbolc on February 1st, Beltane on May 1st, Lughnasadh on August 1st, and Samhain on November 1st. And then the solstices and the equinoxes are the spring equinox, now known as Ostara, on March 21st, the summer solstice, known as Litha or midsummer, on June 21st, the autumn equinox, known as Mabon, on September 21st, and the winter solstice, known as Yule or midwinter, on December 21st. As I mentioned last year, as I researched the main American and Christian holidays, I began noticing a theme that many of the modern holidays have origins associated with these Celtic Wheel of the Year holidays and festivals, which is why I've decided to focus on these festivals for this season. Now for this episode, I'm just going to go over a little history of the Wheel of the Year. The idea of the Wheel of the Year is actually more of a modern idea that originated in the 20th century by British neo-pagans, and it actually combines traditions and celebrations from several different cultures. And as I mentioned before, the Celtic people, until most likely the early Middle Ages, celebrated the cross-quarter days, and that's Imbolc, Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain. And then in the British Isles, the Anglo-Saxons primarily celebrated the 4 solstices and equinoxes, and that is March 21st, the spring equinox, June 21st, the summer equinox, September 21st, the autumn equinox, and December 21st, the winter solstice. How did this Wheel of the Year evolve into the holidays that we're learning about this season? So as I discussed in many episodes last season, many of those holidays were converted to Christian holidays from these Wheel of the Year, like the solstices and the equinoxes, as well as the cross-quarter days. They were converted into Christian holidays when Christianity became the popular religion and paganism went more underground. So that's why we still have kind of pagan traditions that go along with these Christian holidays today. And if you haven't listened to episodes from last year, you can learn more about those main holidays in those episodes. So these are holidays that are the Wheel of the Year holidays that have become Christian holidays. So Beltane is now May Day, Lughnasadh is Lammas, Samhain is Halloween and All Saints Day or All Hallows Day, and Imbolc is Candlemas. The spring equinox on March 21st corresponds with Lady Day or the Feast of Annunciation. The summer solstice on June 21st corresponds with midsummer, which is celebrated in Scandinavia and the northern European countries. The autumn equinox on September 21st corresponds with Michaelmas, and the winter solstice on December 21st is close to Christmas and shares many of those Christmas traditions and midwinter traditions and celebrations. In the 1950s, two neo-pagan groups, a neo-druidic group led by Ross Nichols and a Wiccan group led by Gerald Gardner, brought the two calendars together to create the yearly cycle that many people now celebrate as the Wheel of the Year. And by the mid-1960s, the term the Wheel of the Year was commonly used to refer to these 8 festivals. In history, the equinoxes and solstices didn't have names until the mid-1970s when Aidan Kelly, who was an influential Wiccan and author, gave them names. And he called the summer solstice Litha, the spring equinox Ostara, and the autumn equinox Mabon. And then the winter solstice, he just used the Old Norse word for the midwinter celebration, which is Yule. And from what I've noticed over the past several years is that these names have taken on in popularity, and many people seem to refer to these names now when talking about celebrating the solstices and equinoxes. So throughout this season, I will be discussing how each of these festivals are celebrated, how they've been celebrated in the past, and how they are celebrated today, and then how we can incorporate these old traditions to renew these holidays. So when you break down these festivals, it's really a helpful calendar that celebrates the change of the seasons. It's based on the movement of the sun throughout the year and helped people keep track of the agricultural cycle of the time, and also represented birth, death, and rebirth of nature. It reminds people that life and death are cyclical and that we need to give thanks for the harvest, for life, for birth and rebirth, as well as death. It's also a reminder that nothing is permanent, and that when we're in the darkness, the light will return, and that when we're in the light, that it will also wane and eventually be taken over by the darkness. And it helps give us rituals and ways to celebrate all of these changes. I also noticed that all of these festivals' main focus is holding on to the light, whether in the darkness or in the light. Around Yule or Christmas time, there's a lot of focus on bringing lights into the home, in the hearth with candles, more modernly with Christmas lights, and this is a reminder that the light will return. And even at midsummer or Litha, it's about spending time outside and celebrating the longer days, and is a reminder that the days will begin to shorten, but the importance is focused on celebrating the light that you have when you have it. I've also noticed that in the past years that these holidays are gaining popularity on social media platforms. I know for me, the first time I heard of Mabon or Samhain was around 2020, and since then I've seen a lot of people who are reconnecting to the old ways of celebrating these days, and some people are even creating their own new traditions to make it more of a modern celebration. Something else I've also noticed that many of the people who are reconnecting to these holidays identify as witches or pagans, or something that to outsiders might seem a bit taboo or woo-woo, but I think that it shouldn't matter what your religion or spirituality is. I think these holidays should be celebrated as human or nature holidays without a religious connotation. Many of them are currently associated with Christian holidays, but the Christian celebrations have lost the real reason that they are even celebrated, which separates us from the earth and her seasons. The reason I think we should be celebrating these as human holidays is because as humans, we're all living on this earth together, cohabitating with nature, and these festivals remind us that there are changing seasons happening around us, which is especially important in our modern day culture, where many people spend most of their days indoors in front of screens and don't really experience or pay attention to what's happening outside or even inside of themselves. And by connecting to the cycles of the seasons, it can help us to pay more attention to the changes of the earth, to help us see how alive she is and how important she is for humankind. We are provided from the earth, and if she gets sick, we get sick, and we will die. So it's pretty important that we care for her and pass down those ideas to new generations so that their descendants have an earth to live on. My objective with this season is to hopefully find a way that everyone can reconnect to these holidays so that we can reconnect to the earth, and in return, maybe we can heal the earth and possibly even find some healing for ourselves. So, that wraps it up for this episode. I'll be back in June to celebrate the summer solstice, also known as Litha. And, as always, if you have enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please like and subscribe, maybe even leave a review so other people will know how much you like it. And are you new to the Wheel of the Year festivals, or have you celebrated any of these holidays in the past, or are you incorporating any of the ideas that you've learned from past episodes on the podcast? I would love to hear your celebratory stories. Feel free to send me an email at letscelebratepodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Let's Celebrate Podcast and on YouTube at youtube.com/@Let's-Celebrate-Podcast. And all my references are in the show notes if you're interested in reading more about the Wheel of the Year. So thanks for listening and joining me on this adventure. Have fun celebrating, and I hope you've learned something new today. Bye!